What's up guys, and today I'm going to talk about the DC statehood movement and why DC statehood is a terrible idea, why it should not happen, and it is a complete power grab. So let's get to it. There is a massive movement to make DC and Puerto Rico a state right now. Of course that is because both are heavily democratic, and that would give the Democrats 4 additional senators, 2 from DC and 2 from Puerto Rico, and a number of representatives. Of course, this has happened somewhat before in US history. It happened in the 1950s and 60s, early 60s, late 50s with Hawaii and Alaska. And this is different, and I'm just about to tell you why. So in 1959, President Eisenhower approved the statehood of Hawaii and Alaska. Hawaii, then a Republican-leaning state, and Alaska, a then Democratic-leaning state. Of course, it was meant as a compromise to restore political balance, as is quite clear thanks to the historical archives. Alaska, of course, turned out to be a quite Republican state, and Hawaii a very democratic state. So what is the difference now? Well, the Democrats, especially a bunch of groups in the Democratic movement, want to turn DC and Puerto Rico into states, which would give them a higher number of senators. Of course, now they have the Senate for the first time since 2014, when they lost it in a massive landslide defeat, where the Democrats lost 9 seats to the Republicans. And of course they only hold the Senate with a 50-50 balance, with Kamala Harris breaking the ties, and where they are relying on people like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema to side with them. So in other words, Joe Manchin is the rightful, or the current president of the United States. He is in full control of the Senate, and no one can really take that away from him at the moment. So what are the Democrats trying to do? Especially progressive movements want to make DC a state. Yeah. Now, it is as unconstitutional as it gets. Why? The Washington DC metropolitan area was designed and was drawn out of this area between the states of Virginia and Maryland, mostly a part of Maryland, in order to have a federal city. A federal city which was not part of any state. It was meant to not be a part of any state, mostly because it would be a city owned by the federal government and by the country as a whole. So you cannot have local voting blocks, local citizens that vote and make decisions on behalf of the state when it is actually representative of the entire nation. A person in Wyoming has just as much to say about Washington DC politics as a person in Iowa or a person in Washington DC. Of course, you can say that it's not the case because a person in Wyoming's vote is more worth due to the Electoral College, but I'm going to look away from that in this moment, because it is a imperfect system, but it is probably the best that it can be made. But of course now this is being torn away by this DC statehood movement. So what shall we all make of it? Since 1959 there has been 50 states in America, and it is a very round number, and it is for a specific reason. It is not meant to be more. And the only people that advocate for it to be more are those that want to make a political power grab, and they want to increase the power of their party, specifically the Democratic Party, and specifically the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Because, as you know, DC is a very left-wing area. No, not a state. Not yet. Not ever, I hope. It's a very left-wing area and district, and the people there would definitely vote for the typical AOC Bernie Sanders candidates, regardless of circumstances, as they have shown to do throughout their history. Puerto Rico is a bit more conservative, but would still lean Democratic, and probably have 2 Democratic senators and a full delegation of Democratic congressmen. So why is this problematic? A condition for living in Washington DC is that you do not have the political power to decide all that much for your city. Of course, the people would vote for statehood if they were asked to. It's an overwhelming Democratic majority, and they would vote for statehood, but it is not the right thing to do, and it must be prevented at any cost. Washington DC is a federal city. It should be a federal city, and it should never become a state. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.